Most people believe jobs are simply economic tools, a way to earn money, feed a family, and build a future. But what if I told you that, less than a century ago, jobs were engineered not just to strengthen a nation, but to control it? What if the promise of employment, something people fight for today, was once turned into a psychological weapon capable of turning ordinary citizens into obedient soldiers, loyal fanatics, and state-driven machines? This is the story of how fascist regimes didn't merely create jobs, they industrialized obedience. If you think those tactics died with dictators, think again, because their fingerprints are still visible in modern political propaganda, corporate power structures, and national economics. To understand how work became weaponized, we must go back to the early 20th century, a period defined by economic devastation, humiliation, and national identity crises. World War I left much of Europe wounded, bankrupt, and filled with unemployed, angry populations. Germany faced crushing war debt, hyperinflation so extreme that children played with worthless banknotes, and unemployment rates that turned cities into ghost towns. Italy, despite being on the winning side, felt betrayed, economically frustrated, and politically fractured. Unemployment soared and people felt abandoned by weak democratic leadership. Traditional capitalism seemed broken. Marxist revolution movements were rising. People were hungry for stability, pride, and purpose. In this power vacuum, fascist leaders like Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler realized something no other political movement fully exploited. When people are jobless, they are not just poor, they are directionless, and directionless citizens are easy to mold. Mussolini was the first to weaponize employment as a political tool. He understood that controlling jobs meant controlling behavior, loyalty, and identity. He didn't merely promise work, he promised national rebirth through labor, wrapped in glory, discipline, and sacrifice. His philosophy built on one key principle: you are nothing without the state. You exist only through the state. Hitler perfected and expanded the idea. In Nazi Germany's propaganda, work became a sacred duty, not a personal choice. Public employment wasn't created simply to build things, but to build allegiance. Fascist leaders learned that jobs could eliminate political dissent, create dependency on the state, reshape culture and social norms, turn population into mobilized force, produce propaganda through productivity. In other words, employment wasn't economic policy, it was social engineering. The first step was geniusly vile psychological manipulation. Fascist governments didn't say they were providing jobs to fix the economy. They claimed jobs were part of a grand national mission. The unemployed weren't given work, they were given purpose, uniforms, marching orders, and community identity. Workers became soldiers of labor. Factories became extensions of the battlefield. Productivity became patriotism. In Italy, massive public works projects like roads, buildings, and rail systems were promoted not as infrastructure, but as proof of national destiny. In Germany, work programs such as the Reich, Labor Service, and the Autobahn megaproject served dual functions. Economic boost, militarization disguised as development. The public believed they were building a modern industrial future. What they were really building was a war machine. By tying employment directly to national loyalty, fascist regimes gained unquestioned obedience labor force, ready for conversion to military production social structure based on hierarchy and conformity. Psychological dependence on authority jobs, under fascism, became passports to survival. Opposition was no longer just treason, it became unemployment. Once economic dependency was established, the next phase began: weaponizing labor for totalitarian goals. Factories shifted from civil goods to mass weapon production. Workforces were reorganized into military-like units with strict discipline. Propaganda films showed smiling workers, but hidden behind them were informants, punishments, and ideological training. Youth were indoctrinated early. Boys were taught that labor and war were the same path. Girls were told their national job was reproduction, child-rearing, and homemaking for the state. Eventually, work programs expanded into forced labor, prison camps, and exploitation of conquered populations. What began as national employment reform quietly evolved into slave labor systems. The weaponization was complete. The fascist employment model was not designed for long-term prosperity. It depended on constant expansion. War spoils. Once war pressures increased and external resources dried up, the economic facade cracked. Food rations tightened. Eventually, both Italian fascism and German Nazism collapsed under the weight of their own design. The miracle employment systems vanished overnight, exposing that much of their success relied on coercion, manipulation, and future destruction. Millions lost not only their jobs, but their lives, freedom, and identity. After World War II, most nations promised never again, yet post-war governments quietly adopted modified versions of fascist employment strategies, national service programs, militarized industry subsidies even in modern democracies. Politicians use employment promises not simply as economic policy, but emotional leverage. If you vote for me, you'll have security. If you follow us, you will not be left behind. Jobs are still political weapons, only now with softer packaging. Today, global employment systems show patterns alarmingly similar to fascist tactics: massive state-funded job programs to increase loyalty, corporate monopolies acting as quasi-governments, algorithmic behavior control in workplaces, economic fear used to silence workers, patriotic marketing tied to labor and industry. According to international labor data, billions of people now rely directly or indirectly on government-funded or government-protected employment, meaning dependency is higher than ever. Modern tools like surveillance technology, social credit scores, and media conditioning have made job-based control even more subtle and powerful. The methods evolved. Employment is not just economic, it is psychological power. Governments and organizations that control jobs control behavior, belief, and identity. Fascist employment systems succeeded because they mixed work with meaning. They didn't offer salaries, they offered purpose and belonging, making resistance emotionally difficult. Modern societies are not immune. Employment dependency and propaganda are still active tools, only now disguised as opportunity. Patriotism and progress. The dangerous legacy of fascist employment is not the jobs they created. When work becomes tied to identity, nationalism, and obedience rather than freedom, creativity, and personal growth, people become instruments rather than individuals. Are we working for a living? If this video made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dive historical investigations. Your awareness is your best defense.